Hi, I'm Amy Porter, and this is my podcast. My mission is to show people how to empower themselves through music, business, and media. I try to see as clearly as possible how I can help. I showcase the music that I've played and the people I've met along the way. I'm a wife and a stepmom. You might know me as a professor, a performer, a producer, a publisher, a recording artist. I'm the founder of a couple of nonprofits. Welcome in to my Porter Flute Pod. Welcome to Porter Flute Pod. It's Season 6, Episode 5, and we're in performance therapy. If you haven't sleuthed me earlier, I'm in my late 50s, and I learned the flute before the computer was portable, so I'm often asked how I did it. And I ask back, did what? What are you talking about? People want to know how I made a career before the ease of information and accessibility. I want you to realize we all got by without the internet or the computer for gaining wisdom about our music, for gaining wisdom about musicians and the art form. And I'll give you 5 reasons why I think the first 20 years of my playing the flute was so successful without the computer. In the pod, asking really great questions about the past, Alan J. Tomasetti, and the music featured on the podcast today is in celebration of the scary music season. Trio Verado's latest audio and video recording is Skeleton at the Feast by David Sampson. It's Jaime Amador on viola and Joao Luiz on guitar. You might remember David Sampson's Undercurrents for Solo Flute was written for me. So I'll explain how we got to interpretation and originality and owning all that without the computer. Thanks for being in Porter Flute Pod. I'm so happy you're here. On April 30th, 1993, the internet became public, and that was 10 years after it was born. Now, 30 years later, there are funny memes asking if Gen X kids are doing okay, and I'll say, we're doing fine. We survived outside on the playground with things that could kill us, so we're figuring out the tech pretty well. So how did I research music, and who influenced my life without the internet? Well, I'll give you 5 reasons why I think that I was successful in the first 20 years of playing the flute and why I succeeded without a computer. And truly, the story is different for all of us. It depends on demographic in the United States, where you can get to easily. So your county, your city and state, New York City, San Francisco, Chicago, Philly, and Cleveland. Those cities offered the classical music nerds more candy than a candy store could hold. But if you grew up in a rural area and had to have somebody take you to lessons and ensemble practice and choir practice, then it was much harder. And so that's why I begin with the first reason for successes without a computer: mentorship, parental influence, and support. It's number 1. My parents blasted the radio. Classical music every day. LPs were played. The Met Opera was on the radio every Sunday. They sang in the Northern Delaware Oratorio Society, and when I was 14, my mother begged the conductor to let me sing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in German. And they said okay. So I began the flute in 1973. Now, the second is demographic, being near a big city. Wilmington, Delaware was where I saw opera, and Philadelphia was where I saw the orchestra, and that allowed me to play in the Delaware Repertory Orchestra, where I begged to leave, but I stuck in it, and the Youth Orchestra of Greater Philadelphia. We toured Australia. It was an incredible time. Now, music stores, that's number 3. Music stores were how we had relationships with music, literal sheet music. We had landing music on Concord Pike. It was like your local music store, and they would stock whatever you needed. And if they didn't have it, they would order it and handle it for you. So my dad taught piano, and he would order the music from the store and deliver it to the student at their lesson, and the student would pay him back. It was a lovely way to play music. This was 1977. Okay, now, number 4, LP. LPs were the thing. And for me growing up, it was 45s. So a 45 of black vinyl with grooves in it, that was your pop tune. And then 78, meaning 78 revolutions per minute, those were the big ones. They had the symphonies on them. And classical music was on the 78s, and I remember falling in love with Beethoven's 4th Piano Concerto from hearing it played on the classical music station. And the other side of the LP was the 3rd Concerto, very famous. But I couldn't stop listening to Claudio Arrau play the 4th. Now, of course, we had Galway and Jean-Pierre Rampal LPs in the house. And then, I don't know who remembers this, but if they announced on the radio that there was a famous flutist coming on, we would instantly grab our tape recorder. How many of us remember recording off the radio? It was bootleg. So we did that. And then finally, we would sneak big recording devices in our bags and pull them out with tiny little microphones and record live concerts. If we were the ultimate fan. Moving to the final and 5th tool for growth maturity, and for those who are in the throes of it now, the thing called adulting. That tool is reading. I was curious, so I read. Television was taught to me to be simply something that could be turned off. It held a lot of drama in it. But getting better at the flute wasn't something that could be turned off. The real information in order to get good was in the books that your teacher suggested, if they were good teachers anyway. The dictionaries, the scores, libraries, everything to do with the word research. Grove's Dictionary of Music, the Encyclopedia Britannica, A through Z. And if you couldn't afford the whole A through Z, you had to go find the, others from a friend or the library or school. Articles in the new magazines that were just coming out. And pedagogical methods from the greatest minds alive were coming out, and they were only really known about if you got those magazines and saw the ads, or the music store actually had a copy. Program notes from live concerts were a huge benefit. We'd collect our stage bills for research purposes. Some of us still do. And talk about wanting to research live music. I never paid for a ticket as a student, by the way. You waited at intermission outside of Avery Fisher Hall, it was called at the time. And you'd wait for the patrons to leave, and you'd ask them for a ticket. And they always smiled. In fact, it was like a tradition to help the students who only wanted to hear Zubin Mehta conduct Strauss. It was 1985. I graduated in 1987 with a master's of music at age 23, and I met a computer not long after that. And the only reason for meeting the computer? Audio engineering. I needed to record myself. And so my relationship with the computer began. And 10 years after that, I bought a domain name. And you know what that's called? here are some questions from my producer, Alan J. Tomasetti. He says, I see it like almost the Oregon Trail pioneers that fought hard to find what they needed to find. Flutists back then, we can call them pioneers, true hunter-gatherers, trying to find good recordings to listen to or find that source of knowledge that wasn't readily found. So the question is, what was it like to have to find recordings of what you were working on versus now? Well, now we find recordings, lots of them. And back then, there were recordings from artists that you could hear on the radio, and then you'd want to buy their cassette tape to play in your car. Okay, let me tell you about the mecca of all record stores. It was called Tower. I'd go into Tower Records in Manhattan and not be able to afford everything I wanted, and so I'd try to find those compilations, meaning find as many recordings that had the number of pieces that I was working on and wanted to work on all on one recording. For instance, those great recordings by a not yet knighted James Galway. That Iberic Concerto was a must. Early Ron Paul recordings were a must. You had to go see Julius Baker play live with the New York Philharmonic or buy the recordings with the New York Philharmonic and Bernstein. In Tower Records, there were enormous posters from the record labels of all their artists, and they were intimidating. They were almost screaming at all of the Juilliard students, none of you will end up on Deutsche Grammophon, don't even try. We were intimidated. One night I walked into Tower in Greenwich Village, and there was one poster of a young girl pretty much naked behind her violin. The violin, and then there was legs and arm, that was her album cover. That right there was really scary. And by the way, Naxos Records was the compilation bargain bin. Remember, it was literally a box pretty much up to my waist. You'd walk up to it. It was cardboard, and it had a pile, like a garbage can, a pile of CDs, inexpensive CDs. And there was a sign that said $3.99. And so you'd buy a bunch of Naxos CDs along with the James Galway LP. I mean, listen, think about it. That's a great marketing story for the books, right? Look how successful Naxos is now. Anyway, once you made a record or you knew someone who made a record that ended up in Tower Records, you'd go in and make sure that much awaited LP, cassette, and then by then in the 80s, the CD, you made sure that all those things were in the front of the bin so that everyone saw. Recordings of new works were not around. Newer works were mostly a word of mouth thing, and thank goodness for the National Flute Association, because there, annually, in a different part of the United States, you would be able to hear the work that was new and most likely performed by the person who commissioned it. And then you could whip out your bootleg recording device. No, I'm kidding. Your teacher also was the best person to showcase a new work, and competitions were becoming popular, globally especially. So that brought about a new set of standards for new music, especially the usage of extended techniques. I had to learn a piece for Kobe, and the extended techniques written by one composer in Europe could be different than another composer in the United States, South America, Asia, anywhere, right? Something else. It was the rage to call something a New York premiere. That's so fun to remember that. You'd make the New York premiere of something or the LA premiere of something because nobody really heard it unless they were there, live, or able to hear a bootleg recording. Okay, truly, I tell you, the answer to this question is we all just learned to stand up for ourselves and play what was written on the page. Musical truth. Translated, that means believe in your performance so fiercely that people listening believe your interpretation and talk about it. That's it. So I entered the Kobe Flute Competition in 1993, played the commissioned work written for that competition, and won the prize for the best performance. So I went down that road of fiercely believing in my interpretation. I did that when I was in the Atlanta Symphony, and MySpace was starting around that time too. I did not go down that path of MySpace. Instead, I just went down the path of a solo career. I saw that I could make a difference to others through the way I played, not what I played. I'll move on to say that whether it be on a composer's website or in a concert a colleague recently had, students now can easily find the recordings faster, learn the pieces easier. There's no worry about if the person who's performing the concert has sold out of all the tickets and, you can't get in. As a student before the computer, there was not only worrying if the recordings had sold out of the record store, but sometimes in the library, you were waiting for someone to return the items. That was an issue. And if the copy was lost, you have to scramble to find another copy. Spending money on these resources, always an issue. So instead of checking the internet for free to find the recordings, I had to save up and purchase them. And for some students, that's not an easy thing to do. So now students have more free resources and free access to free resources. I still spend money on the hardback editions as a teacher now, like Altez, Taffanel and Gobert, and books by Quantz, Moïse, John Krell, Kinkadiana, and others. I spend money on that. And if you must know, I don't read music off the iPad. I don't read music off of blue light. I like to see the entire piece in front of me, and that just is a thing. Like I either memorize it or I use the music. And plus the pedal, the internet, the size of the music, they're not variables I can quite assimilate into my choreography. Another question is, waiting until the last minute to study for a music history exam and cram for all the listening examples, it's easier for students to turn on their computer now and have everything at the click of a button. How did you work around that? Well, back then, we knew the hours of the library and we planned accordingly. And if people knew of another way, I don't know what it was. The Walkman, that helped. That was invented in 1979, and we all had the second generation of them by the 1980s. And they played cassettes, and cassettes had been around since 1967. And here's another thing we did. Hanging out with friends and having listening parties. That was fun. Testing your stereo speakers, listening to Jimmy Lin play the most amazing violin playing I'd ever heard. I learned music the old-fashioned way and sought it out through passion for the art and discipline in my craft. We can say that every generation is resourceful in knowing how to get the information they need, but some generations had to work a little harder than others. Connectivity now is the norm. You take it for granted, so next time you get a new piece, think first about how you would play it, as written, as you know it to be, instead of running to the latest recording, YouTube, Reel, or Thread. Make sure you test your skill and knowledge first. That's the way I was taught. Lastly, address the instrument. It's ready for you. Are you ready for it? You're watching so many people doing while all you're doing is watching. Go do. Do you. Feel what it feels like and have a great cleansing cry about it. Look at the nature around you as you take your run, memorizing the concerto that you have to play in a few months. Be alone, reading the past journals of your life, and witness how far you've come. And if you've never written down morning pages or journaled, try it. Go through your old lesson recordings and transcribe them into words. Or affirm out loud the things you find profound. You deserve to be a good teacher to yourself. You deserve to be an impactful person. And you deserve to come from a place of knowledge without consequence or question. You should not apologize for not knowing. Stay with your interpretation, your audition preparation, your concerto performance. Feel it. Stay in it. Breathe into it. Be it. Own it. You'll vibrate at a higher level and attract more good things in your life because you put down the blue light and radio frequency waves and you had your own original thought. You had your own words and you did your own work on your own instrument. If you add in personal work, spiritual work, volunteer work, giving, service, teaching, you'll begin to feel lighter and come into your own career. I appreciate you being in our performance therapy platform today. You can find over 80 episodes of Porter Flute Pod now at porterflute.com. You can also find me at amyporter.com and amyporterproductions.com for the big picture. On Instagram, Threads, and YouTube, I'm Porter Flute. Thanks for being in Porter Flute Pod. I'm so grateful for you.